Welcome to Business Growth Talk, the podcast where we go beyond the hacks and into habits, mindsets, and strategies that drive real business success. Today's guest is someone who doesn't just talk about growth, he engineers it. Doug C. Brown is the sales revenue and profit growth expert who's helped companies generate over $960 million in sales. He's worked with giants like Tony Robbins, Procter & Gamble, and Intuit, and built or led over 35 businesses. In this episode, Doug breaks down the exact systems that help CEOs uncover profits and scale with provision. If you're ready to move from unpredictable sales to measurable math-based results, this is the conversation you've been waiting for. Let's get into it. Doug, you've helped generate over $960 million in sales using a maths-based system. Can you break down what that system looks like and why it's so relatable across different industries?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on here, Mark. And believe it or not, we now are over $1 billion in sales.
Congratulations.
So look, every business runs on the same premise. People don't think that it runs on this, but it does. Money in, money out equals something. That's the formula, really, when it comes down to it, right? So the question is how effective and how efficient are we bringing the money in? How effective and how efficient are we not letting the money go out? Because if it goes out faster than it comes in, at the end of that equation is an equal sign, it'll be a loss. If it's, equal in and out, it's break even. If it's higher on the in, lower on the out, we have a profit. It's basically that. And I break it down that way so people understand. And so depending on how effective or how efficient we are on that formula will depend on how we can grow and scale our business. So, and the goal of the business. So what we do is we look at every aspect of that whole customer journey. And essentially what we do is we find revenues and margins that businesses usually are already sitting on, but they haven't collected those. So things like that get lost in the cycle, dormant clients, dead leads, lack of referrals, no cross-selling, upselling, low buying frequency, underpricing, high refund rates, inadequate lead qualification, and it goes on, list goes on and on, a message misalignment is another one. And so what we do is we look at all these aspects of a company, and what we're doing is we're measuring all of these things. And so we measure the measurements between point A and point B. So let me give you an example. Let's say that we're generating a lot of leads, but we're not setting a lot of appointments. What does that tell us? So I would back up and say we're generating a lot of leads, but what are our lead to response ratio? What is our lead to positive response ratio? What is our lead to appointment setting ratio? Now, if we look at just those metrics, if we're doing outbound reaches, before we measure the response rates, we got to look at what is our connection rate? Because maybe we're sending out a bunch of messages. This happens a lot, let's say in cold email. People use cold email. They send this out and they're getting 1 in 250 people to respond. Well, that tells us a story. Is it our targeting? Is it our messaging? Is it the time of day we're sending it? We've got to investigate that process. Now, if they're going for 1 in 250 that are responding positively, let's say, what if we got that from 1 to 250 down to 1 to 125? Now we double the response rate of positivity. And if we look at that, which goes into appointment ratio, and just for the lack of better terms, let's say that's 100%. Now we've doubled the amount of appointments going through that process. If we had a static close rate of 20% and we could double the lead volume going in, we now have essentially doubled the sales in the business, right? So we look at every little metric you can ever imagine. And then what we do is we apply math to that metric. And then that math reveals a story. That story says, hey, This is working, that's not working, this is working great, we can optimize it, this was not working at all. Geez, should we even be doing this anymore? Those type of stories. And then we adjust the ratios and balance throughout. And what we're doing is we're getting growth increases of just percentages in each area. And if you can imagine over, let's say, 21 areas, we get a 3% increase. It's not just a 63% increase at that point because these metrics stack and compound on one another, Mark, and that's what we do.
So there's probably some business owners out there that are listening.
Yeah.
That are not measuring everything.
Yes.
How do you work with them? Because they might be measuring revenue and profitability. And for my business, my podcast guesting business, for a long time, it was just about sales and about bringing people in.
Sure.
And I worked with someone a couple of years ago, and he emphasized the importance of KPIs.
Right.
So we now track up to about 25 different points on our business. Mm-hmm. But there's about 6 that are our key metrics,
right.
Which things like revenue, sales calls, profitability, and things like that. What are the suggestions? What are the conversations that you would have with people if they're not tracking everything?
Well, firstly, it's almost impossible to track everything. It's a full-time job. But, the question is, what's the goal, the truthful goal? Depending on that answer, that will tell us what to track.
Okay.
Right? So let's say, for example, they were saying to me, you know what? I want to get my sales team more effective. My sales team is outbounding. And by the way, sales teams can be a huge revenue leak for a company, and they can be a huge revenue gain, even profit gain. So, but let's say we wanted to get the sales team, it's like, look, my sales team's not performing as I wanted to. I would really like to get a lift out of my sales team. And I don't know, pick a number, 40%, 30%, 50%, whatever it is. Well, then I would say, okay, let's look at the metrics. Let's look at 11 metrics. How many outbound reaches are your sales team going after? Okay. Now, if you have an inbound lead, how many times are they going out after that lead? Are they just taking the lead? And we measure this. Next ratio, as we talked earlier, what is our connection rate with that lead? So if we just stay top level with these and then say, what is our response rate from that? Now we could measure positive response, neutral response, negative responses. Why is that important? Well, if we're reaching out and we're connecting with people and they're going, hey, Larry, don't call me ever again. I don't ever want to hear from you. Click, right? And that's the response that's coming from. Doesn't matter how much money we're spending on marketing. We're burning marketing out the door at that point, right? So once you get to the response rate, then the question is, what's the appointment ratio? Once you get to the appointment ratio, it is, now you can measure appointment ratio to presentations made if that's what you want, or appointment ratio just to close rate. How many appointments result in a close? Because we're measuring that on a sales team, that tells us, okay, we get 10 appointments and we only close 1. But other sales team members are getting 10 appointments and they're closing 4. That gives us an investigative process to go, okay, what's this team member who's closing at 40 doing that this one's not closing at 10? Now, when we investigate that, we might find out, they can handle objections. The other one person can't, right? Then we can train that area. Once we understand that, what's the follow-up ratio to second close? In other words, we close on first close, then we follow up, what's the next close? Are we increasing transactional value? Are we increasing buying frequency? I.e. transactional value, cross-sell, upsell, getting more out of that first sale. Buying frequency, are we getting them to buy again? Are we setting and if, let's say that we're closing at, 80%. It's just insane. 8 out of 10. But we have no extended buying frequency. Why? Right? These give us reasons to measure that. So buying frequency, are we extending relationships through our current relationship, i.e. referrals? Right? If we just measured those ratios alone, it would tell us a lot. And more importantly, it would hold the accountability to the sales team to actually start doing all of this stuff if they're not doing it.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarifying.
You're welcome.
Right, let's go back though.
Yep.
What sparked your interest in business and sales after leaving the military?
After leaving the military, what was the question again? After leaving the military?
What sparked you into interest into business and sales?
Oh, well, I never left business while I was in the military. So I started working for my dad's business at the age of 3. And I swept floors for 25 cents a week. And I loved it. They brought me to the pub or the bar at the lunch period and propped me up on the stool. But I got to listen to a lot of business owners when I was just a little boy. So by the time I was 7-ish, I started my own little business of doing a paper route. And I hired sales team members, which were my friends. I went out and got other people's paper routes and I acquired them, if you will. I took them, gave them a piece, gave the salesperson a piece, the delivery guy a piece, myself a piece. I had no money. My brothers financed it. And so I was always involved in business at a very early age. It was from an entrepreneurial setting that my dad had actually set up. And so when I was in the military, I always had side businesses too. No matter what they were, I've had, in the military, even a multi-level marketing business. I had a multi-level marketing business while in the military, right? Because in the military, you don't know your schedule all the time. So it's better to be in recurring revenue in that because you could get pulled out for 3-4 weeks, right? But yeah, when I got out of the military, everybody in my family was taught you still need a formal education. And so I did that. And while I was going through that, I realized I was making a lot more money selling than I was making that I'm going to get to go into a corporation or a job, right?
Yeah.
And so that kind of sparked me back into the entrepreneurial side of it. And I started a consulting and auditing practice in the telecommunications business world while I was finishing school. And I tried working in, I got my degrees in biology, nuclear medicine, business. And I tried working in the hospital, and that didn't last very long because I realized the hospital in the United States is a business.
Yeah.
And so that spun me out of there, and I just never looked back from that.
Now, you say that you've built and led 35 businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a point in those 35 businesses where you had like a turning point that you suddenly had that sort of aha moment where you understood business enough to actually make something hugely successful?
Yeah, I've had turning points where I'm like, why did I do this? To turning points like, I just lost 1.2 million to I've, had turning points to, I just made, 1.4 million, right? That type of thing, in a short period of time. So it's, yeah, you always have, see, here's the thing about being in business. Business is, I think, the great leveler. And because the business doesn't care how we feel. It just wants to be fed. So again, money out, money in. And it's always trying to get money out on you, right? It's always. Because the business just, I have found a few lessons in business that I can pass on, which is usually to get something done, it takes you 2 to 3 times longer than you figure, and it costs you 2 to 3 times more than you figure.
Yeah, I worked that out very quickly. Yes.
Right? And so many people, when they're starting a business or they're in a business in their first year or so, they're like, what? This is not working, right? I mean, you had mentioned podcast to me in the beginning. I can't tell you how many people that start a podcast and they think they're supposed to have massive sponsorships in their first 2 to 4 months. They're supposed to be monetizing and making money like crazy off their podcast. And that's not the way business generally works. I've only had one business out of the 35 that took off like the rocket ship off the launch pad.
What was that?
That actually was a music business we built a DJ agency.
Okay.
And that thing took off like crazy, And our first year we did, just myself, over 200 DJ events, never mind all the other agents we were at, right? But that is like, a good time when it happens, but it's not the normal, right? And so normally a business takes a year to 2 years to really start to take hold. But so many people are in such a rush, and a lot of people are the same thing when they're going forth on a new initiative. They're like, this initiative's got to work in the first 30 days. And it's like, okay, we want it to work in the first 30 days, all of us. But the reality is, most of the time it doesn't. So that was one real big lesson that I've learned. Second real lesson is, before you run into something enthusiastically, make sure the market actually accepts it.
Or wants it.
Well, wants it, I agree, but has to accept it too, right?
Okay.
And why? How do they accept it? They pay for it.
Right.
You actually need buyers before you roll it out. And I can tell you, I've made those mistakes, and it's a big mistake. Before we roll out a new initiative, we should go out there and make sure that people are actually going to give us money for it. So let's pre-sell it.
Imagine this: you have a great business, strong results, and a message worth sharing, but most people outside your network still have no idea who you are. Growth slows when visibility stops. Podcast guesting solves that. Instead of chasing leads or interrupting people with ads, you speak directly to audiences who are already interested in your topic. They share your story, your approach, and your value you deliver. Trust is built before the first conversation. At Podcast Introduction, we help business owners get booked on the right shows. We research targeted podcasts, pitch you on your behalf, and position you as the expert, so every interview becomes a growth asset that drives leads and authority. If you want more visibility, more credibility, and more conversations with the right clients, podcast guesting is a powerful lever for you. Visit podcastintroduction.com and start expanding your reach today.
Right? You see this happen in infomercials all the time, and on television, buy the whatever the new light or whatever's coming out. 6 to 8 weeks delivery time. That's usually what it is, right? Why? Because they don't have the product built. They've just got a concept. They roll it out, and if they don't get enough sales, they refund the money. Say sorry, we couldn't work it out with the manufacturer, and that it's dead. So they've limited their money that they put out. But when it comes to things like people like, well, I'm going to go into a new business segment, or I'm going to open up this, or I'm going to buy this acquisition on this company, but they never test whether that acquisition will fit into their actual business flow. Yeah. And so, we just spent $6 million. Great. Now what do? I've got, all these loans that I got to pay back and stuff. So I think that's another real lesson. And the biggest lesson I think I've learned at all, Mark, out of everything is, Henry Ford was right. If you think you can or you think you can't, you can. And you're absolutely right. And so what I've learned is our brain and our thought pattern, if we don't constantly challenge that because of our childhood wounds and the way we grew up, it'll actually mess with your success. So you've always got to constantly keep growing internally as well as one does business-wise.
What's your biggest success and biggest failure in business?
Biggest success. Well, that's a good question. I would think, so I helped Tony Robbins and Chet Holmes. Tony Robbins, big tall guy,
I'm pretty sure most of my audience will be. I think everyone who's done any sort of personal development will have come across Tony Robbins at some stage.
Yeah, so Tony's a super nice guy. I helped him and a man named Chet Holmes who wrote a book called The Ultimate Sales Machine. And it was the number one selling sales book, business growth book for, I think, 7 years, if I remember correctly. And I joined them as an independent president of training and sales. And when I first took over, I started doing the metrics thing to their business. And that business essentially tripled within 2 years. So I think that's probably one of my biggest successes. I'll give you just some short example. I took their presenters' close rate on their team, across all their team, from 17.8% to 43.2% in less than 4 months, and it never came down for 7 years. I raised their coaching fees from $9,000 a year on average to $30,000 a year on average per client. I took one product set and we were selling only $86,000 worth of that product set. And this one was a barn burner. We sold $8 million worth of that same product in that first year because I just retrenched it and retooled it. I took their refund rate down from 15% to less than 1% within a week. Sales team went from 12.2% close rate to 22.1% close rate on the front end. Like all of these metrics started stacking and it just tripled the business. And so I think that's probably one of my biggest successes that people would say was notable, but I've helped into it. I mean, they went from a $7 million loss to a $10 million gain in a year on a division. So I've had some good things. I think, though, probably my most proud moment that for myself was I helped a company doing $3.5 million. They grew from 3.5 to 6 million in the first year. Then we installed an agent program into their company, and they went from 6 to a little over 10 million in the next 15 months. It was all recurring revenue, and they sold off for like a 5-6x multiple on revenue. And yeah, that was like, woo, that was fun, right? I think that's one of the
failure though, Doug. Give me a failure.
Well,
come on, I know you're an impressive guy. I've done my research on you.
No.
I know you're an impressive guy, but everyone led or built 35 businesses. Come on, you got to give us one that failed.
Well, I can give you probably 450 examples of failure, right? And that's the thing. You have the wins, but if you don't have 5x failures, you're not doing enough. I mean, it's so. I classify this as a failure because I helped a company. They were sliding from 50 million really fast. In fact, I told them they were going to be sliding, and they told me I was crazy. And within 6 weeks, they called me and they said, everything you told me is happening. I told them they want to lose 62% of their sales team over the next 2 months. And they had lost about 50% of the sales team in 6 weeks. And so their revenue dropped to 48 million. And I went and I got them from 48 million to 110 million in 2 years. Now, why is this a failure? Because I got there and I told the owner, you have to fix your sales team and your customer service because they're lying to your clients. And I'm not going to be part of growing something if you're lying because you're messing with people's retirement. And so I said, do we have, pinky swear and solemn promises? And he said, yes. And for 4 months, he held true to that. And we turned this thing around. We were back to over 50 million within 4 months. And then he just hard pivoted. And I went to him and I said, look, I've got a whole system in here. You're going to scale now. And he's like, sorry, I'm not going to do it. And I literally told him, I said, the SEC is going to come in and they're going to shut your companies down. And he told me this, I'm in Manila, I have 22 companies, no way the US government will get me. And I said to him, the United States government has toppled other governments. I don't think you're a big target, buddy. They're a pretty big entity. And I know they have alliances with other countries around the world. It's the way they work, right? So I departed that company, and 2 years later, while they were doing 110 million, the United States government, SEC, went in to a place in Fiji and shut down a live event and seized all 22 companies overnight and fined him $125 million. Now, that's on me, really, when it comes down to it, because I feel I failed at that point because I built this whole system that created evil, if you will, right?
Right.
Now, it wasn't my intention to do that. We were running on the right path, but I grew up this way that you do the right thing no matter what, right? And so that to me was a failure. But I mean, there's been tons of failures over the year. I have spent, you know how much money I have lost in bad, like just in those three things I gave you in the beginning. I swear I've lost over $10 million just not testing the market, not rushing things when they shouldn't have been rushed. I mean, we just did one recently where we were going to go into a different business segment, which we had worked in before. And this is why I'm telling people to do this. We had worked in it before successfully. I mean, we had made multiple seven figures in doing what we were about to do. So we were like, let's just pivot over here. And I pivoted over there and we invested, let's see, 40, 35, so 75 plus another 50, $125,000 into this segment. And we lost it all within 7 months. And it did not work. It just didn't work. Then once I got to this 7th month, I'm like, why don't I test this idea? I'm like, dude, you've been testing it for 7 months, you idiot, right? I'm saying these are the chatter going on in my head. But I'm like, why don't I do what I always tell people to do? And I tested it, and it wasn't even 10 days. We were like, this isn't going to work. Like, duh, you know what? 125, I could have bought my children brand new vehicles. You know what I mean? And they would have been like, Dad, I love you more, you know? But you make mistakes like this. Here's the thing I want everybody to know, though, Mark, is you can't beat yourself up for these things for a long period of time. Give yourself some time to grieve. Bring yourself into a room, smack yourself around, do whatever, yell it out, scream it out, get over it, and move forward in the direction you want to go. Too many people stay in the doom and gloom loop. And guess what? When we stay there, we're reflecting our vibration of our bodies, if you will. Yeah. It's like us looking at a lake, and the lake reflects back the mountain and sky. Well, we're the lake at that point. So if we're like in scarcity and this is never going to work, and guess what we're attracting? More people that are going to come to validate that idea.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because a lot of people who start businesses, they'll experiment with a few different options. Like I think when I left corporate, I experimented with a few different things, and some were successful, some weren't so successful. So, but it is right. It's that mindset to be able to start again, test again, experiment again until you find something that does work, that A, works for you personally, and then B, it actually works as a business as well. So yeah. Mindset is incredibly important.
Yeah, and this goes with partners too. If you're going to take partners on your business, test them before you actually become partners, right? So if we look at it like, okay, let's say we're going to go down to the edge of a pool or an ocean or a river or whatever, and we want to go swimming. We usually put our foot in the water before we actually jump in, especially if it's in January or February, right?
Yeah.
Like you're in the UK, right? So I'm not going to go down to the sea and just run in blindly.
To the North Sea, no, it's cold.
Right? So we usually test it. And, but when it comes to this thing, we get so excited, we get so emotionally involved that it's like, oh my gosh, freedom, like especially coming out of a job that you maybe like, hey, I can do this better. I can do this right. Wait a minute. Hold on. There's not just one department that you work in. There's a whole bunch of departments. So now you're going to be the whole bunch of departments, So the question is, have you kind of walked through this process before you actually have leaped into it? When I built my telecom business, I did this the right way. I spent almost a year gathering clients, gathering referral vendors, gathering this, gathering that. And we were only making $18,000 US before we launched out of corporate America. But we had momentum. But I made the partner mistake. I had three partners. In 4 months, all three partners were gone. We were still making $18,000 a year. Lost $60,000 in the first 4 months because all the partners took the money and did things with it, right? But got back to work, had my pity party, had my screaming little moment in my garage, actually, and got back to work. And in 15 months, that company was $1 million. So just test this stuff is what I'm telling people to do. And, you can't test it to ad nauseum, but you just test it enough to know if it's going to work or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So when you're working with clients
Hmm.
and clients are coming to you, how do you, what's the first thing that you look at to be able to assess the business? A, about the value of the business, but B, if this is something that you could actually help them with?
Yeah, great question. First point is, what's your truthful goal? I cannot tell you, but it's in the high, probably 80s to 90s%. Most people don't know what their truthful goal is. I just talked to a really nice gentleman. He's got a service-based business, and he's doing 6.9 million. I talked with him maybe 6 months ago. He said, going to probably finish out around 7 million this year, which he did. And he gave me his EBITDA number, and he said, that's too low. And I said, yeah, it is, you know. So, working with thousands of companies, Mark, I know right out of the gate that most companies are leaving 15 to 20% of revenue and EBITDA just on the plate every year, right? So I asked him, I said, well, what's your truthful goal? And now when I told him back at the same goal I asked less than 6 months ago, he told me it was to get to 10 to 12 million. And now I asked him again. And his answer was, well, if I could get my EBITDA from here to here and not grow my revenue at all, I'd be satisfied. So I asked him, what's your truthful goal? Right? Because that's two different plans to grow from 6.5 million to 10 million in a year, or to get your EBITDA from, say, 15 to 18 or 20% in 1 year. It's similar but different. And so it turns out that his real goal was to take it from 6.9 to 8 million and increase the EBITDA by 5 points. So here's the thing. If we build a plan for a skyscraper, but you only want a 3-level building, not in your best interest, right? In vice versa. So once that's
Before
done,
we go any further,
yes, sir.
Sorry to cut across it. Can you just give us a definition of EBITDA? Because I just want my audience to make sure they understand what the term means.
Yeah, it's earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization is the accounting speak, right? What does that really mean? Before you pay tax, before you do all your deductions and you amortize your building and you take all of these things out, essentially EBITDA is talking about the cash flow, the operating cash flow of the business. Why is that important? So it's important because this tells you how much cash you can actually use toward resources. This tells you maybe where your cash is flowing. Not maybe, it does. But if you're going to ever look at a valuation on a company, investors look at your EBITDA and they base their offer generally on the EBITDA. Now, every industry has a standardized EBITDA. Maybe the average, I think, is 4.6, if I remember correctly right now. Well, let's just round it to 5. So let's say let's say you're doing $5 million today. Your EBITDA is $2 million in cash. And we can, and you can get 5x on that company. That means you'll sell that company for $10 million.
Right.
Now, if we can take that EBITDA and raise that by 500,000, and you still can only get a 5 multiple, then you're now going to get 12.5 million. So 2.5 million more, right? Now,
it can have a massive impact on,
oh gosh, yeah,
on valuations especially.
Yeah, valuations and whether they buy it or not too. So, and you can raise EBITDA in many different ways. Remember, money out, money in equals. So money coming in, you raise that up without raising the percentage of cost to get that money in will raise your EBITDA. If you bring money in and you can lower that cost, widen out the margins, higher EBITDA. If we can stay at the same or just grow a little bit, but radically reduce the margins, and it's not, unlikely to be able to do that, then we could still EBITDA. If we don't grow at all and we reduce the margins, we increase EBITDA, right? So that's what EBITDA basically is.
Thank you. And Can you give me a real world example of how you've transformed a business with their increasing their EBITDA?
Yeah, well, the one I told you that went from 3.5 to six to six
Yeah.
to 10, right? When we went from 6 to 10, we were able to not have to pay salaries to sales team members. So if you look at an employee and a sales team member and you're paying them, let's say, $100,000 a year plus a 25%, 20%, which is what essentially they were doing, you've got roughly roughly got 35 to 40% per your sale going out. But when we moved it to an agent model, we have a zero base salary and we paid 15 to 20%.
Right.
Okay, so now $4 million more in sales, a little more than that, like 4.5 million. And we're paying out 20% versus 40. Let's just keep the numbers easy, right?
Yeah.
You see how that would raise the EBITDA immediately, right? And so we were also able to take and cut headcount that was supporting the sales team because the agents were more independent. So we were able to take out some jobs and move them from one place to another. Therefore, we never had to hire additional headcount. So there's another place you save money. So that company specifically was a win-win. That's why they got so much money for that company, because when the investors, the private equity company, looked at this, they were like, "Oh, this is a gold mine sitting here," right? So that's one example. I can give you others, but that's one example we talked about earlier.
So, how have you've gone from a service-based consultancy business to building scalable tools?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is it Vivitno?
Oh, Vivitno? Yeah.
Vivitno. Tell me about that.
Here's the thing about Vivitno. English-speaking people can't pronounce the name.
And I apologize for all English people who will read this in the show notes and have no idea what we're saying. So please clarify for me.
So we're changing the name of the company. Now, see,
Okay.
This goes back to testing things before you roll them out, right?
Yeah.
So I was looking for youmatter.com. That was what I wanted, because Vibitno in a Slavic language means you're important, you matter, etc. And I couldn't find the URL one night, so I'm just tooling around and I'm like, give me what you matter means in different languages across the world, right? And in the United States, we take names like Spanish names and we put them on automobiles like Mustang and Zephyr and, all this stuff, right? And the American public is like, oh, that has got to be a cool car because it sounds like a Zephyr, right? Wasn't really a cool car, but I mean, it just sounded like that. So I was like, the Bitno, it just runs off. And then Bitno was the original. It was like Bitno, and which means important. And then I'm like, you're important, the Bitno. Now, my wife was born in Poland. So when I said it to her, she was like, oh, that's a brilliant name. I love that name, right? Because Eastern European, Slavic, there you go, right? Yeah. But I have found people in mostly English-speaking countries have no idea how to say the name, especially in the United States. You did an amazing job, by the way, Mark, compared to some of the names I've heard. So we are changing the name. So Vibitno it started out to solve one problem, which was follow-up. People are awful at follow-up. We all have great intentions. We all, So people go to these networking events. They'll go to a workshop. They'll meet people, and they all exchange cards or digital cards, and they all say the same thing. Man, I can't wait to talk to you again. Do you know I've been measuring that for 7 years, and it's 13.2% of people ever get back to the other person.
So someone taught me very early on that sales, that the main component of where a salesperson is successful and not successful is on follow-ups.
Yeah. Follow-up is a common courtesy.
Yeah.
Right? I do this thing, I haven't done it in a long time, but when I was doing live talks, I would ask this question about follow-up because people would ask me to talk about it. And I'd say, ladies, you're in the audience, you're dating someone that you just went on the first date and you had an amazing time. how long do you expect to wait for that person to follow up with you before they're burnt toast? In your mind, how long?
Yeah.
Do you know that over 90% of the audience says within 24 hours?
Wow. Really?
Uh-huh. And then about 2 to 3% of the audience, depending on the audience, says they have up to 2 days. And if they go over that, they're like, for 90% of the audience, they're burnt toast after 24 hours. But if you go over 2 days, you don't even toast anymore. You're like, they just stomped you to death, right? And so I want people to capture that image in their mind, because this is a date. So isn't your first meeting with your client.
Yeah.
And the arrogance of sales sometimes is, oh, they'll remember me. Tell me what you had for lunch 3 days ago, folks, right? Most of you can't remember. What makes you think they're going to be thinking about you 5 seconds after you leave that building? So your job is to maintain the relationship. And that's why I built the tool. So it would do it not just on meetings, but these 13.2% of people who are getting a hold of each other, yay. But what about the near 87% that aren't? Do you know how much money is sitting in that relation? And they spent thousands or tens of thousands of dollars to go to these events, 2-3 days of their life. Nothing's happening. So then I started applying this to every single thing, possibility, first meetings. Somebody responds to us over an email, LinkedIn, right? But not just following up, but how do you make it meaningful and relevant each and every single time? So we built that tool, and then we said, geez, let's throw a CRM on around this. By the way, not testing it, right? And we realized that people wanted this follow-up tool, and the CRM is amazing, by the way. It's awesome. And some people like the fact that it's integrated, but we didn't have to build the CRM. So again, going back to the lesson, if there's no recurring theme other than this, folks, and you pick it up, you'll probably give Mark a big hug when you see him. But so that was Vibitno, and then Vibitno then turned into a metrics tracking issue for sales teams and things like that. So it's kind of evolved over time. And what we're thinking of doing is just taking the full-on metrics model and maybe building out the ultimate consultant software or something like that, because we have a lot of consultants who actually like it. So again, you find things as you go along in business too.
Oh yeah, 100%. Because if you're being asked for things as well, that's a great thing I've learned in developing businesses is you have a relationship, and then one of your clients comes to you, go, well, can you do this? If you believe in the Richard Branson school of thought, yes, I can.
Yes, I
even
can.
If you can't, and then you work it out afterwards. But no, it is a very important point for business owners that you need to be listening to clients, especially because if they're wanting extra things on top of it, that's great opportunities for growth. And okay, you've got one example of someone who's willing to pay for it, but if one person is, you could then test it and see if other people would be interested with it as well.
Yeah, and the thing is, I love Richard Branson, by the way. The thing I think Richard doesn't tell people is he can go out and get money for anything, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so just be aware of that, folks. If you're
Yeah,
not,
he can walk into a bank and or a private individual.
yeah, I'd like 3 million to test this, please. Oh yeah, sure. Here you go, Richard. You want it in tens or hundreds, right? So, but and I really respect him. It's the question you're really posing, I think, is awesome, because truly, what is your business? A lot of people get into business thinking it's this, and then the market defines what the business is down the line. And, Steve Jobs had a big home run with Apple, but I have found his advice not to really be all that solid for entrepreneurs, which is, you tell the market what they want and deliver it.
100% agree. He was a very special individual with a very special outlook on life and a brain that could potentially, well, it did predict the future.
Yeah.
And most of us, we don't have that ability.
And nor do we get it right usually on the first time, Mark, because like, okay, so he happened to hit something at the right time,
Yeah.
right? And so it doesn't mean it doesn't work. I've had businesses where I've said, I think the market wants this and I'll go forward. And then we tested it and the market did want it. But the reality is, most of the time, your business will morph from one thing into a variant of what you think that should be. And so with Vibitno, I started it off as this thing for everybody. It might niche down into this one niche play, right? So the market will start to tell us, I would think probably, in all the businesses I've ever worked in or had myself, I can tell you concretely half of them have altered their business trajectory along the path. And sometimes it's necessary. And you see, COVID did this. Like the pandemic did this to a lot of businesses, right? I mean, it was like restaurants. You always went in, everybody came in. It was like the party. Hey, welcome to the restaurant. Then for 2 years, no one could go to a restaurant, right? So they turned into takeout, right? Or home delivery, right? And some of them have never gone back. I know some restaurants that are just not even open to the public more than one night a week now. So,
we've had that as well. How have you evolved as a leader?
oh, slowly. um, I joke a little bit about that, but I actually have slowed it down as a leader. Back in my younger days, especially, I was just like, let's just go, take the village, right? It's just like, follow me, and here we go, right? And I learned sometimes there's a formidable opponent in the village. And so, as you get a little older, which I am now, you look back on life and you say, okay, what worked, what didn't? And what will work today? Because what worked 30 years ago, sales has changed over the last 30 years, right? The internet's flattened it, social media has flattened it, like pandemic flattened it, right? So I say slowly in jest, but I really do. I mean, as a leader, I am constantly upgrading my skills. Still to this day, I mean, I'm in my 60s. I'm still doing this. And I will do this till the day. I will quote a mentor of mine who said, son, you're probably going to find me sitting in this chair in this building when I'm deceased. Because he was a guy who just constantly learned and kept growing. And he did. He was in his late 80s. And he, he's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And, he was always reading 3 books at one time. And I asked him one time, I said, why not read one book, then go to the next book? And he goes, no, I read a chapter, then I read a chapter of this book, then I read a chapter of that book. I don't get bored that way. And I'm like, oh, okay, you're a creative scatterbrain entrepreneur like the rest of us, right? He laughed. And so you've got to constantly upgrade your skills. And when you're doing that, it takes time. So that's why I said slowly, right? And I will give everybody a hint. I'll give them a path. This is Tony Robbins 101. If you want to learn something, find somebody who's already done it. Find 3 people that are already done it. Approach them and ask them for help. You'd be shocked how many people will help you for free. And then what you do is you look at the overlapping patterns of success in those 3 to 5 people or whatever you are doing. And guess what? You do those things. And you're going to do them faster than they did them because they had to forge the pathway. They had to cut down the trees to make the path. You don't. So that's one way of escalating it.
What would you say your risk appetite is, and has it changed over the years?
Yeah, it's actually grown.
Oh, interesting.
It has, yeah. My risk appetite early on in my life was, I would say I was less risk averse.
Right. That often is the inverse to what most people experience.
I'm completely messed up, right? That's why. But here's what I've learned. It's I guess Henry Ford really, when it comes down to it. Sorry to keep quoting Ford, but
No, no,
um,
great guy.
he always said if he lost everything, he'd get it all back in 2 years because he knew the pathway. And I'm at that place now where I don't worry about building a seven-figure company, right? So, and if you can build a seven-figure company with 40% profitability, you're never going to starve. I mean, it's just the way it is, right? So it's so I'm far more risk tolerant than I used to be because back then, if I lost $125,000, which I did, um, it was like, oh my, the world's coming to an end. How am I ever going to recover from this type of thing? I remember once I had borrowed $150,000 from the bank, and it didn't go well. And I'm like, my loan payment was like 3,500 US dollars a month or something on that loan. And I was like, how am I going to do this? This business just imploded at this moment, right? But I found a way. And so paid it off within 2 years because here's a trick for everybody. I did this early on in my life. Grow your personal income by 10% a year. Just do it. Just try it. 10% a year. And I did this when I was making less than $100,000 a year, way back when. And I was making 60,000. I said, if I could just get to 100. And then I said, well, I'll try to grow by 10% a year. And I did. I went from 60,000 the first year. I think I did 81 or 82,000 the next year, which was more than 10. And then I went from 82 over 100. It was like 120,000. Then I went from 120,000 to 232,000 the following year, 232,000 to 357,000 the following year, 357,000 to 494,000 the following year. So in 5 years, I went from 60,000 to almost $500,000 a year. I had $500,000 in the bank. My house was paid off. Everybody was happy, healthy. How did that happen? When we focus on a 10% growth every year on our personal income, it forces us to gain skill sets to get there. And it teaches us a pathway to get there. And so once you realize, hey, I can do this, and then you can recreate it again and again and again. And I've always kind of kept going, on that 494 and up. And when you get to a certain place, it's like, okay, I can live on $300,000 a year, no problem, right? And all my bills are paid. I have extra money so why live in fear? Right? So that's where I'm way more risk tolerant now. If you said, hey, we're going to invest, $7 million into this venture and we're going to do it on ourselves, I'd be nervous, trust me, but if it failed, oh well, we'll start again. And it's that Chumbawamba song, I get knocked down but I get up again. Never going to keep me down, right? That's kind of how I feel now.
Brilliant. Look, we're coming to the end of the interview. I ask the same 6 questions to all my guests. So quick fire questions. They don't need a quick fire answer. First question is, what's the best decision you've made?
Having my children and marrying my wife.
Are they there? Is that why you answer the question that
No,
way?
no. No. My children are actually I'm in Europe right now. They're in the United States. But they were here. They were here for 3 weeks and it was awesome. They're older now. And my wife's here, but she can't even hear this because she's in another part of the building. But that is, look, here's the thing. You can have all the money in the world and be the most miserable person in the world, right? But if you don't have a strong, this is my personal belief. If you don't have a strong, loving, connected family relationship, I think we're missing out on life, and, because Dave Thomas, who built a company called Wendy's, I heard him on an interview and he said building Wendy's was the worst mistake of his life. And I was like, what? You built Wendy's, right? And he said, I was never home for my kids' events. I was never home for this. Now I think he was in his late 70s or mid 70s or something. And he's like, yeah, I got the money, the boat, I live here in, the sun. And it's like, but look, my whole life was gone. It was all about
Yeah,
Wendy's, right?
yeah,
So
that's so true.
there's that balance. So to me, that's why I give that answer, because I can lose everything. And as long as I have them, I'll rebuild it again.
Yeah, yeah. Next question. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Ooh, business or personal?
Either.
My mother said to me when I was young, very young, and I couldn't quite grasp it. She would say to me, she always called me Dougie. Dougie, it's sad that wisdom is wasted on the aged and energy is wasted on the youth.
I've heard that before. Yes.
And I don't know where she heard it from. Um, but that was always a great piece of advice, because as I've grown older, I realize it. The other piece of advice that my father and my mother always, my father especially told me this. He said, Doug, always be nice to every girl in your primary, high school, grade school, whatever. Always treat them with decency and respect. And I asked him, I said, Dad, even if they're not being nice, he said, always treat them with decency and respect, and pay attention to the ones who are not that attractive right now. And I said, why, Dad? He said, because when they turn 18, they're going to bloom. And lo and behold, that was one of the best pieces of advice he ever gave me in my life.
Love it. Absolutely love it.
Hmm.
Next question. Who's the person that's helped you most in your career?
My wife. I would say my wife, because she's kept me balanced. Um, I've had great mentors. I mean, really great mentors. I've been fortunate. When I look back on my life, I'm like, how did I become the president for Tony Robbins? Like, how did I get to work with this guy? And then I worked with another man named Russ Whitney. And Russ told me he was at one point Tony's mentor, but Russ owned companies, $1 billion worth of companies. And one of them was Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the brand. And man, that guy's brilliant. And it's like, how did I get to work with this guy? How did I get to have this $350 million mentor? How did I get to have access to all these people? So I can't say that one of them was the mentor of mentors, because they all had different avenues. And when you seek a mentor out, folks, find the mentor who's going to be brutally, brutally truthful with you. I remember one day Russ called me up and he goes, what the bleep is the matter with you? I said to him, I said, nice to talk to you. And he literally said these words to me, why are you being so defensive? And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, read your emails. They're all defensive. I'm like, you're full of crap. They're not my. We had that conversation. And he's like, just read the emails. And I read the emails and I called him back and I said, I got to apologize to you. 80% of my emails are defensive. And then he said these words to me. He's like, Doug, what do you have to prove?
Interesting.
Right? Look at your record. What do you have to prove? But I grew up, Mark, in an environment, even though my mother gave me great advice, it was an environment that was, my mom especially was like, you're going to be good, you're going to be great, but you will never be good enough. So again, childhood wounds carry it all the way through, right? So we'll act as if. And so those are the things but my wife's been the number one instrument in my life of gently, sometimes with high courage, telling me, I think you're running down this path and there is a big cliff at the end of that pathway you're not seeing, right?
Great. Yeah, my wife keeps me very grounded, very grounded. Next question. Tell me about a regret that you have.
Regret I have would be not having the courage to ask some of the girls out when I was younger that I failed to do. Finding out later on in life they really liked me. Yeah, that would be one big regret I think I have. I think I don't have a lot of regrets, in life anymore. I used to have regrets. I used to have regrets like, geez, I was a dad who started being a dad in like his late 30s, almost 40s, right? And then I used to think I had a regret of, well, I should have had him younger and all that other stuff. But then I realized I was so driven for success that I probably would have been Dave Thomas, right? And saying the same thing. So I don't have a lot of regrets, except sometimes I've opened my mouth and said things that I probably shouldn't have. Um, but other than that, and I think the biggest regret I probably have is not believing in myself in the way I should have earlier on in my life. But again, that's in part what makes me so effective now, because I can recognize that in other people, and I'm like, can address those things for people, right?
Yeah, yeah, brilliant. Was there a time when you wanted to give up,
Oh,
and what made you pull through?
how many times do you want to hear? There's there's more than dozens, I'll tell you that right now. Um, a piece of advice that Richard Minervino was that $350,000 million dollar mentor of mine. I was having um, I was having this challenge in business. I had hired a uh, I had hired somebody as an independent, and we had an agreement. We signed it all. Long story short, after the engagement, it was a consultant. They went and claimed unemployment insurance.
Oh,
And then the state of New Hampshire shows up on my door and hands me this and says, "You owe us money. We're going to fine you. We're going to rack you against the wall. We're going to do this," right? And I'm like, it's like 8 a.m. I'm like, oh, bleary eyed, right? And and so I'm sitting in Richard's office, and I'm telling him this story. And as I'm telling him this story, he's like chuckling a little bit. He's like, right? And then I'm telling him, I'm like, yeah. And then the state, after they left, I call my CPA, and I said, "What's going on?" He goes, "You need to fight this, because if you lose it on the state level, now the federal government's coming in on you." Da, 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 da. And I'm like, and I'm telling this story, long story short. And as I'm telling the story, he's just laughing hard, more and more and more. And finally I said, "And yeah, I got 5 things going on." And he just starts roaring laughing. And I got, quite frankly, upset with him. And I looked at him and I said, "Dick, I don't think you're hearing me. I don't think you understand. I got all these problems. Do you ever have these problems?" And he stopped laughing like that, Mark. It was like split second. He dropped his glasses, peered over the table, looked at me in the eyes, and he said, "Son, every day of my effing life." And I said, sorry to use the effing, but that's what he said.
that's fine.
And I looked up at him and I said, "What?" He goes, "Son, this is what you signed up for. You're in business, you're an entrepreneur. This is exactly what your life's going to be like. Either get used to it and do it, or stop. There's no in between." It was a great piece of advice, because anytime I've gotten into an issue like that, I've always stopped back and reflected on that. And every time I reflect on it, Mark, something happens. Like one time we were losing money. We were losing like $20,000 a month in the business, which wasn't a lot of money, but it was enough to make me pay attention, right?
Yeah.
And then on the television, Ted Turner from TNT TV came on, and they said, "Ted is losing $20 million a day." And I'm like, well, he's got Jane Fonda, so I don't know. Like, so, but it put it into perspective. It's like, listen, if this man's not like freaking out on TV, over 20 million a day, why should I be freaking out over 20,000? I think we got similar problems, but in different capacities. I'll get past this, right? So yeah, so that's the answer, I hope, to that question.
Brilliant. No, that's amazing. Tell me something that most people don't know about you.
Oh, at one time I used to have very long hair. Folks, if you're watching this on video, there's the joke. I have no hair. But I actually didn't. I used to be an original rock musician.
Oh,
I was a
interesting. All right.
professional. Yeah, I was actually when I was going through college, which in your country would be called university, if I remember correctly, right? Um, I actually sold music equipment and I was selling to the professional bands. Aerosmith, Billy Joel, Paul McCartney and the Wings. You know, the list goes on. The Eagles, right? Awesome people. And I loved it. It was like the best job ever, right? You get up late, sell music equipment, go out, party with everybody. It was awesome. Um, and I was on my way to becoming a professional musician. And uh, again, I didn't have the self-belief to do it. But then Barry Goodrow, Barry, if you ever listen to this, thank you, brother. I appreciate you. He was the guitar player for Boston, the band Boston. He said to me one day, Doug, you're a pretty good musician. You should go to music school. And I said, Barry Goodrow from Boston, the hottest selling album of the century right now, is telling me I'm a pretty good musician. All right, Barry, I'll take your advice and I'll apply to music school. They'll never let me in. So I'm like, where do I apply? I'm by Boston, so the New England Conservatory of Music. I'll apply to Berklee College of Music. It's like a worldwide known school. Never going to get in. I go to do my interview and my thing at Berklee, you know, and they go, welcome to Berklee College of Music, sir. And I'm like, son of a gun. And so I then was involved in a lot of original bands. And the same band, well, Aerosmith and then Boston, I was talking to them. And the same band, I was like, hey guys, how you doing, right? Brad Delph and Sib, the drummer, and all this stuff. Yeah, we're going on tour. Really? How long? 310 days. You got any breaks? Yeah, a couple here and there. I'm like, how you guys doing this? On a bus. I'm like, you're going to be on a bus together for 310 days? And what I realized was, I don't want to live that life. So yeah, that was the epiphany, if you will, out of that process. But a lot of people don't know. I was ready to go on tour, and I had the relationships like that. Like we could have probably maybe even backed up Boston or backed up one of the bands to get going. But yeah, that was it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Doug. That's it for today's episode of Business Growth Talks. That's been an absolute masterclass with Doug. Thank you so much. If you've taken away just one idea on how to find hidden profits or scale your revenue predictably, imagine what would happen if you applied it today. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please do me a favor. Can you hit the like button, subscribe to the podcast, and drop a comment letting me know what your biggest takeaway was? I read every single comment and every single feedback that you give me, and it helps shape the future of this podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one.